Welcome back. I'm Jim LaPierre. This is SoberNow. Today's topic is moving away from addictive thinking. As always, really want to hear your questions, your comments. Hit me up on any of the streams that we have going today. We're streaming on SoberNow's Facebook page today. If you haven't been over there yet, please just give it a quick like, and you'll get notifications of our future live streams and all of the other content that we're putting out. Streaming today on choosehelp.com and a bunch of other sites around the net. So would love to hear from you. How are you doing? How is your recovery? What kind of questions do you have, whether they're on topic or not? I would love to hear from you. Okay, so let's get into it. Black and white thinking is the hallmark of an addictive brain. The thinking is almost always at the extremes of all or nothing, and of course there's nothing manageable or sustainable about it. It's just what we became used to, and for most of us, unfortunately, that type of thinking was common for us long before we developed a substance use disorder, sometimes before we even started using. Being an adult child of an alcoholic or addict tends to lead to addictive thinking. Growing up in the presence of addiction or abuse or neglect often results in that, and surviving different forms of trauma result in thinking at the extremes and thinking in very black and white ways. I think the most perhaps subtle aspect of black and white thinking is that not only is it only at the extremes, it's always a dichotomy. And so dichotomy is a term that only a therapist would use, I suppose, but to me it means equal and opposite extremes. So in any problem solving that I'm doing, in any kind of reasoning that I'm trying to do, there's only two options that we see, and they're equal and opposite extremes. And of course this perspective is inherently self-limiting, but very common. The expression that my friends in recovery use is, we found that the only thing we needed to change was everything. So to change the way that you think is no small thing. It's fundamentally examining your perspective. How do you see the world? How do you see yourself? And considering that perception is something that is limited by a host of different factors. But right now we're going to focus on addictive thinking and how that limits perception. So to me, perception, the best way that I describe it is it's like putting blinders on a horse. We want only for the horse to see what's directly in front of it, tunnel vision, can't see any other possibilities. So the more that I am in recovery, the more progress I'm making. Ideally, my perspective is wide, my worldview, my open-mindedness. I can see a lot of possibilities. But the more that I'm afraid or the more that I'm struggling, my perspective narrows. And this is really what black and white thinking is about. It's all that I can see in the midst of this tunnel vision. It's fight or flight. It's all or nothing. It's now or never. And what's amazing about that is that the idea that we could leave something alone or make a conscious choice not to do something because it's simply not time for that really doesn't exist in that perspective. We're all about kill it or cure it. We're all about fix it even if it's not broken. Patience is just something that is foreign to us. We act on impulse. And quite often, we engage in self-will run riot. I've always appreciated that expression because it's the biggest aspect of addictive thinking, which is things have to go the way that I dictate that they go, as opposed to my higher power, as opposed to considering the needs of others. And of course, all of this is very fear-based. We struggle to believe that things can turn out well. We struggle with delayed gratification. We struggle with not being in control. And it's the now or never mentality is a product of, for a lot of us, the way that we grew up. We grew up learning that we'll see means no, maybe means no, and someday means never. So if it isn't something that's immediate, It's something that we struggle to believe in. It's something that we anticipate disappointment around, and it's very hard for us to live with hope. Control is a huge piece of addictive thinking, and it's, for most of us, it's our number one character defect. If we don't feel like we're in control of everything, then we feel like we're out of control of ourselves. All of this underscores the difference between sobriety and recovery. Sobriety, I'm fond of the expression that being sober doesn't necessarily make your life better, it keeps it from getting worse. Recovery is about building a life that's so good that you wouldn't want to screw it up by drinking or using. And so again, we're faced with this massive undertaking of how do I change my perspective, how do I change my thinking, and you go into recovery and somebody tells you, you just have to live one day at a time, which feels like an impossibility. Maybe you read something like The Promises of AA and it feels like a pipe dream, or it feels like something that is for other people but not for you. The expression, you cannot think your way into a new way of living, you have to live your way into a new way of thinking, is something that I have found to be profoundly true. I often encourage folks to read The Thinking Person's Guide to Recovery. That's a book that came out a lot of years ago by a really smart guy, an attorney named Bert Plyman. I appreciate how candid folks are when they talk about their struggles in recovery, and for this author, he talks about making the same mistake over and over and over again, which of course that's us in a nutshell. He was a very accomplished attorney, highly educated, very, very smart guy. And so each time he went into recovery, he sought out people that he saw as being most like himself. And unfortunately, with his limited perspective, seeing people that were like him meant seeking out highly educated, very successful professionals. Not necessarily seeking out people that had what he needed or the life that he was looking for. And so he writes very eloquently about going through the same patterns, sticking with the familiar, and getting lousy results. This too is part of addictive thinking. We tend to maintain our status quo because we're people who fear change, we're people who fear transition, and whether change is positive or not, if it's far enough outside of my comfort zone, it is, by definition, uncomfortable, and there's this sense that we don't know how to be. So this super accomplished guy writes a book about how he finally was able to achieve long-term sobriety and how he was actually able to change his perspective, his way of thinking in his life. And what's most remarkable about that is that for all of the sponsors he had chosen that were very much like him, the sponsor that he had the greatest amount of success with was a guy that had dropped out of 4th grade and made his living as a janitor. To someone that is not familiar with addiction, that might sound very strange or hard to understand. For folks who really understand substance use disorder and furthermore really understand recovery, I think it actually makes perfect sense. The folks that I have known that have the greatest recovery programs are really very good at keeping things simple. They're very good at being grateful. They're very good at allowing other people to be of service to them and to help them. I often point out to folks that there's so many self-limiting things we can do in recovery and so many pitfalls that we can fall into. And the biggest one is going through things alone. Two heads aren't twice as good as one, they're a million times better than one. Addictive thinking has a lot of blind spots. It has a lot of things that we're not accounting for, and it tends to focus more on the problems than on the solutions. So when we connect with people who have lived experience, who have good recovery, or who just have good ideas, we create a lot of possibilities that don't exist when we're going through things alone. When we're trying, I always cringe, but folks will tell me they're trying to figure it out. And I say, okay, I'm pretty sure figuring it out is addictive thinking done in isolation, and it's the adage that the mindset that created this problem will not be the mindset that creates the solution. All right. So please fire away with your questions, your experience, strength, and hope. Would love to hear how you've made this change or how you might be struggling with some of these changes. I think the next piece to add to this is the vitality of separating what's you and what's your disease. The disease is something that is a part of us that has this enormous influence on our thinking, feeling, behavior, and yet it is not who we really are. Further, the disease will use anything that it can to, well, as the expression goes, my disease wants me dead, but it'll settle for miserable. So if I'm not giving my disease what it wants, it'll take whatever it can get. Further, it'll use anything at its disposal. So something as simple as living with depression or any other type of mental illness is something that your disease will use against you. And so I find it incredibly useful when people in recovery personify their disease and they make the distinction of here's what my disease wants me to think, or here's how my disease wants me to feel or act, and separating that from our authentic self and getting a sense of, what is it that's truly best for me, and what is it that's limiting me. Trauma limits perspective. Avoiding the triggers of trauma limits us. Anxiety limits us. Fear limits us. Depression limits us. And the struggle to accept powerlessness or anything that we find to be too painful or too unacceptable limit our perspective, limit what's possible in our life. And again, the biggest limiting factor is going through recovery alone. I've known a lot of folks who can put together a few months clean and sober, relapse right back on the bandwagon of recovery, and just keep going through this pattern. And what I've noticed is for most of us, that's as far as we can go in recovery alone. The relapse acts as a reset, and we start over doing the same things. So we need to have far more support. We need to have far more folks in our corner, and we need to allow way that greater support. Put together a few months. Sorry, small tech problem. Checking on some of the feeds here. I appreciate you writing in, Althea. Can the concept of addictive thinking be used in trauma work? It absolutely can. And there's a lot of opportunities in this. So the intersection of substance use disorder and trauma is pretty strong, right? And so for most of us, trauma preceded our use and our development of substance use disorder. If in the rare case that that's not true, that we hadn't experienced something traumatic prior to developing addiction, the places that addiction takes us to will almost assuredly expose us to trauma. So what's amazing to me and beautiful to me is that everything that works in recovery from substance use disorder also works in trauma recovery. Everything about the 12 steps is a process of transforming our lives. And so to me, the most important piece of this is making the connection between using and feeling safe. For, as the expression goes, the good thing about being sober is you feel more. The bad thing about being sober is you feel more. I worked with a survivor years ago who had said to me, my condition is very simple. Every time I get sober, I remember. Every time I remember, I get drunk. Learning how to feel safe in the here and now is a huge piece that moves us away from the limitations that trauma creates and moves us away from the perspective that addiction creates. Learning how to feel safe is abstract. It's just an idea. So if we make it a concrete reality, what we're learning about is how to feel safe in your own skin, how to feel safe in your own mind, because it feels like your brain is working against you. And then progressively outward, how to feel safe in my own home, how to feel safe in my community, in my workplace, in the places that I go. For a lot of us, going to meetings or our therapist's office is the first time that we experience feeling safe and being in the company of people who truly get us. That's another huge piece. When we talk with, as the expression goes, earthlings or neurotypical people who don't really understand addiction or addiction recovery, they don't get us. And so the more that I'm keeping company with people who I have a strong sense can understand me and relate to me, the less I feel alone in the world, and the more I feel understood, which results in a greater understanding of self. So learning how to feel safe begins with grounding, having a sense of physical control of one's body. The mistake that we most often make is getting in our head and trying to think our way out of a situation, trying to think our way out of feeling what we feel. And this is a whole lot of mind fucking that just never, ever, ever serves us. So learning how to do one day at a time, how to take and just be in this moment without looking to the future, without reliving the past. There's a lot to that. Million things that help, and what's frustrating is no one thing is going to make it better. Meditation helps, prayer helps, yoga helps. Having friends in recovery helps exponentially. Working a program helps. Having a high level of accountability so that you're not the only one monitoring you, evaluating you, seeing how you're doing. Having people in your life that challenge you helps. And so there's a million different solutions. And I think what's so overwhelming about this is that it feels like I just want one solution, and there isn't one. The solution of being clean and sober creates a million opportunities that didn't exist previously. But the work of recovery is lifelong, and it's about being a work in progress and being accepting of that. My experience is we tend to play to our own strong suits, and so when I work with people who are really smart, they have a tendency to overthink, a tendency to overanalyze, and I love the expression that analysis leads to paralysis. In my experience, that is all too common. And when I've worked with intellectuals over the years, what I've learned is I have to spend a lot of time reflecting back to them, expressing what I understand out of what they're saying. And the more I do that, typically it's well received, and for the first time a person feels really understood. And that's awesome, but as long as we're still in active addiction, all of our thinking doesn't boil down to, okay, I have to make some really simple changes, and what I'm doing is still destroying me. So moving away from overthinking is best done by accessing your intuition. I say to folks all the time that there's three main ways that we know things: from your head, your heart, and your gut. If we're willing to listen to our intuition, we can have a sense of what's real and what's true. And this is something that helps us to think less. This is something that gives us a sense that maybe things are okay, and allows us to move away from being impulsive, move away from being reactive and towards being responsive. Overthinking usually is combined with self-doubt, and this is a huge dynamic that undermines us. We don't just second guess ourselves, we 40 second guess ourselves. And what I encourage folks to do is progressively consider that how you relate to yourself is a relationship. Being your own worst enemy is a relationship. Being someone who avoids or neglects you is a relationship. Being someone who's fair and respectful to you can allow you to catch the addictive thinking in progress. So when you find yourself going over the same issue over and over and over again, chances are you're wrestling with some self-doubt, and you can simply stop and ask yourself, do I truly doubt the conclusion that I'm coming to, or do I just hate how this feels? When we talk about, my friends in recovery talk about finding a softer, gentler way, and that's the kind of mind-fucking that we do to ourselves when what we're looking for is something other than what we know to be true, because the truth is too painful, the truth is too scary, the truth requires that we change or take on greater responsibility for ourselves, for our lives. Black and white thinking at times I think is very comforting because it rules out possibilities that are intimidating to us. It can even actually be something that is occupational. My wife's an accountant. She takes comfort in the black and white of numbers. So 2 plus 2 is always 4. She looks at the work that I do and says, well, that's impossibly subjective and it's super messy and nothing's ever the same thing twice. And I say, right, I actually love that about my work. So one of the many opportunities that exist for us in recovery is transforming things that used to be a deficit or used to be a problem into things that are now part of the solution. So for a lot of us, pursuing recovery and a better life with the same tenacity that we pursued drugs is the key to our success. Using survival skills and strategies that trauma instilled can become a transformation not only into things that make our life better, but also things that we can do professionally. Most of the very best social workers, case managers that I've worked with over the years took the skill set of knowing how to manipulate people and systems and applied it towards a positive end. And so they pursue getting housing for someone who's homeless in the same ways that they pursue getting heroin when they were broke, right? You beg, borrow, steal, you do what you have to do to evoke the outcome that you need. But instead of gearing that skill set towards a destructive outcome, they geared it towards something that not only is healthy, but also fulfilling. And I think that potentially is very liberating, and again, it creates a million opportunities. So use the same hustle that addiction taught you towards something that makes your life better. Pursue a better relationship with your kids the same way that you pursued your drug of choice. Find opportunities that exist for you professionally based on what you can deduce intuitively, based on what your instincts tell you. Be an opportunist. Be someone who's seeking opportunities. That mindset can be adjusted. It can be tweaked into something that becomes adaptive, responsive, and beneficial. So, one more time, I'm going to check the streams. Would love to hear from you. Thank you for checking in. Thank you for the kind words. As always, I want to encourage you to connect with me. Jim@SoberNow.com is the easiest way to do that. Would love to hear questions that you have or obstacles that you might be running into in your recovery. Would love to hear topics that you'd like to hear covered in future streams. By all means, check out SoberNow's Facebook page. Check out SoberNow's YouTube channel. About 125 different videos there, completely free, on different topics relating to recovery from substance use disorder and also recovery from trauma. And finally, check out our website, SoberNow.com. We've moved to a subscription service, so we're more affordable than ever at less than $15 a month. We'll get you access to some home study programs that we've created. And so this is a go-at-your-own-pace kind of endeavor. We have 2 separate programs. One is for folks who are seeking recovery from substance use disorder, and the second is for affected others, for folks like me who have a loved one in active addiction, how to cope with all of the circumstances that surround that. So check us out, connect with us. Please take excellent care of yourself. My hope is that we've maybe turned a corner in the midst of this pandemic, and I'm hoping that not that things will get back to normal. I don't like that mindset. I want things to get bigger and better than ever. And I know that in order to do that, I have to connect with kindred spirits. I have to connect with folks who are changing their lives, and I hope that you'll do the same. So I'll look forward to joining you next week. Please be